Okay, I think we'll start. Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar on how to become a net zero charity. So I'm Nicholas Ponset. I'm the CEO and founder of Aleron. Just to give you a bit of background, I spent maybe I had two phases in my career so far: 10 years in strategy consulting and investment banking, and the last 10 years at Aleron, which I set up in 2010. And if you don't know about Aleron, we are a social impact and sustainability consulting firm. All the work we do is really to help organizations to be more impactful and efficient and sustainable in the way they do it, which means that we support them on their strategies, their operating model, change initiative, their impact reporting, sustainability reporting, as well as social or sustainable investment. So we work with all types of organizations, from businesses to charities, foundations, investors or public sector, and that's really important to us because we want to make sure we understand the ecosystem in which we work. And also a lot of work we do in the UK, we also work in the US and Europe. Now today is really important for us because we care a lot about the charity sector, but also about sustainability. And we felt that actually, although a number of organizations are looking at their sustainability, a lot more could be done. And that's what prompted us to do the analysis that we'll talk about in a few minutes. And we also want to participate into sort of collective initiative. We've set up a year ago with a company called UMaker, which was funded by Nazim Rahman with NAD at AstraZeneca. So we've set up a sustainable medicine partnership to look at the sustainability in the medicine sector, especially all the drugs and what's happening once they are in sort of the environment. But this forum is critical for us to look. So we look today more at sustainability from an environment perspective, but we also interested in the broader sustainability. And we think that at the moment it's really critical because post-COVID, organizations are looking at different ways of working, and it's really a good time to embed sustainability in all of that. So what we will do, Chris, if we go through the agenda, so we talk about the report in a minute, and Chris in our team, Chris Gravning, will go through that and introduce himself. And then we're very lucky to have two speakers with us, including and Chris, to talk to a number of topics. So we'll go through that. I will briefly introduce them now, and then they will have the opportunity to give a bit more detail about their background and motivation when you come to the session around the panel. And then we'll finish, once we have the panel question, we'll finish with a Q&A where you will have the opportunity to ask questions. You can use the chat to do that and send us, and we'll select a number of questions that we can ask the speakers. Now, before I introduce the panelists, just wanted to say that a number of people actually wanted to join the session but could not do it. So we've decided to record it. So the session will be recorded, will be available on our website. So if you know some people who could not attend, would like to attend, please don't hesitate also to share it. You will have access to the recording as well as all the materials which we'll share during this presentation. Now, when it comes to our speakers, we are very fortunate to have today Fergus, who comes from Fit for the Future, which is an environmental sustainability network created by the National Trust in collaboration with Ashden. And the network has a lot of members, including charities, heritage organizations, local authorities, and cultural venues, and is really focusing on having a UK-wide impact. We have also Lucy Smith with us from the Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust, which as a French person, I will use the abbreviation WWT to say it's going to be easier. So Lucy is the head of sustainability at WWT, where she's been working for since 2015. And she works really in a number of areas across the organization on sustainability, from the net zero policy to introducing an environmental management system, or looking at more operational projects such as the installation of solar panel. And she has a huge background in sustainability and can share with us also some of her previous experience, including working with the NHS. So I think I will stop there in terms of the agenda and the introduction, and I will let Chris do a little introduction and maybe sharing with us all the key findings from the report that we've done on the UK charity sectors and the journey to net zero. Chris?
Thanks, Nicola. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. So I'm Kristofer Gravning. I'm the head of sustainability at Aleron. I've been looking into the charity sector space and sustainability over the past few months, and today I wanted to share some of the overview of the UK charity sector, which should hopefully be a nice framing for the conversation with two frontline practitioners, two leaders in the sector, who will provide some of their input and experience with us. The presentation will cover a bit of why net zero, why it matters for charities, who we looked at in our analysis of the top 100 UK charities, what it means in practice being sustainable, so how we judge that, and then look at the key findings. How sustainable are the top 100 UK charities, and what can charities do to improve? Hopefully it'll be a short 10-minute presentation, and then we can get into a general discussion. As many of you will know, the UK will be hosting the next COP26 conference in Glasgow this year. It is an important year. We're in the last crucial decade, as scientists put it, to really turn the ship around. And the UK recently committed to cutting their national emissions 78% by 2035. So what does that have to do with the UK charity sector? Well, the UK charity sector has a massive impact on the UK economy, about 200 billion in economic value. They employ about 3% of the UK workforce, and about 1 in 3 Britons volunteer for the sector. They are facing increased government regulations, charities, some of these being SECR and ESOS, which enforces large organizations in the UK to measure their energy and carbon emissions and disclose this publicly. The 100 largest charities that we looked at have a combined spending power of about 1% of the UK's GDP per year, and about 55 billion pounds in assets. You can see at the bottom there the threshold for a CCR, which is if you have over 250 employees, you have a turnover of over 36 million pounds and or a balance sheet of over 18 million. In our report, we talk about 4 key reasons why charities should care. We've covered the regulatory requirements. They're already here, and with the growing UK ambitions are likely to increase in the future. We have the ability to radically cut costs as part of the sustainability strategy exercise, to really think about how we can reduce waste in the organization. It's important to key stakeholders, both internally, such as staff and leadership, but also externally, donors, regulators, etc. And finally, I think a point that is often missed out is that being sustainable contributes to a charity's social mission in the long run, either directly or indirectly, as climate change is such a big driver of social inequality. Being sustainable actually helps alleviate pressures over the long term. On the right there, you can see a UK, the Charity Commission did a 2020 survey among UK donors and supporters. And you can see the 2 most important reasons for donors to support a charity was that they operate efficiently, 79%, and 52% that they operate to high ethical standards. So there's going to be more expectation, and we're already seeing evidence of increased giving to environmental causes and increased expectation among external stakeholders. So being such an important sector, we wanted to look at how it's performing currently. It has a big influence on society, and we decided to look at the 100 largest organizations or charities in the UK. We did this by looking at their expenditure. So they all met the SECR threshold, which means that they mandatorily have to report and measure their carbon footprint, and that they had a minimum of 1,000 employees. We chose a higher threshold for employees because those organizations are likely to have a bigger footprint and impact being larger. Our top 100 list had a reported income of combined income of 18.5 billion and expenditure of closer to 20. On the right there, you can see a rough breakdown of the different sectors of the top 100 charities. So what does sustainability mean in practice, and how did we judge it? There were four areas that we looked at when looking at the performance of the UK top 100. Number one, we looked at compliance. So were they complying with mandatory regulations on disclosing CO2 emissions? Their strategy and targets. Do they have a sustainability strategy that guides them, or do they have an environmental policy that guides their actions? And do they have a pathway to achieving net zero by 2050? The measuring and monitoring of progress. Do they have the tools and systems in place to support them to deliver on their ambitions? And finally, the reporting and communicating of it. How are they talking about their sustainability? Is it comprehensive? Is it accessible to the public? It is a key principle of the Global Reporting Initiative around the accuracy of information, and it's accessible. And that is a key reason why we looked at what was disclosed, therefore. So you can see on the right there, the multiple sources of data we went through to do the analysis. We looked at annual reports and sustainability reports, strategies, the websites, and policies. So what did we find? We actually found that there is a lot of good progress. There are many charities doing quite exciting things, going way beyond compliance and really thinking about their mission in terms of long-term sustainability. 7 charities have committed to net zero at the time of our review. 18 were guided by a sustainability strategy, and close to half were disclosing information on sustainability. We found that 600 UK charities are large enough to fall under the mandatory thresholds, and that 2 in 3 have an ethical investment strategy. I think so. It's going kind of not only just thinking about the operations and the emissions and the impact of what you do, but also how you invest the assets and how you manage those. I think the big surprise was that 31% of the top 100 are at risk of not complying with UK government legislation. So these were organizations that had not disclosed emissions or measuring them as they were supposed to do. So what can charities do to improve? I think there's a few. I'm not going to go through all the reasons here. I'm going to leave this up and you can have a look at the recording afterwards. But we've grouped them into 3 elements. The first is making sure that there's a strategy in place to guide action, to prioritize action, ideally in line with the Paris Agreement towards 1.5 degrees or net zero by 2050. That the tools are in place to measure and monitor performance, that it's integrated into how the organization reports and incentivizes performance internally, and that it is communicated and reported in a holistic, easily accessible format to the public. See on the right there is Aleron's typical approach of kind of a table of contents of a strategy and what it should include. So that is to hopefully frame a bit of the conversation, and those findings we can discuss some of them also with our panelists. But I hope you found that interesting, and I'll hand over to you again, Nicola.
Thank you very much, Chris. And I've sent in the chat the link to the report for people who haven't had the opportunity to read it and would like to do so. So now we'll start our panel discussion, and so welcome Lucy and Fergus. Thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us today. I just want, maybe as a way of introduction for the audience, but can you tell us a bit about how you got in sustainability in the first place, and what you're currently doing in your organization in that respect? Maybe should we start with you, Lucy?
Thank you very much, Nicholas. That's going to take me a long way back, how I got into sustainability. I guess it's down to my parents. They recycled before it was trendy or required legally to do it. Before there was any recycling infrastructure in the UK, they always took their numerous bottles to the bottle bank at the waste tip every weekend, and they lived and breathed it with allotments and things, and it sort of stayed with me. And then when I went to university, I decided I wanted to do something environmental before lots of other people were, and then I was lucky enough to get a job working for what became the Environment Agency, and I've stayed with it ever since. In terms of how that's informed what I do now, well, you know, it's a passion that's run through me throughout. I live on a boat, so I try and have a low impact lifestyle. But I recognise in the society we live in, it's not actually terribly easy always to do that. You know, we live in a consumerist society, which everyone's trying to encourage you to do more, and we've all got different organisational priorities. So I try and sort of sometimes think about it from other people's perspectives, and that helps me with maybe with communication and trying to win over the important hearts and minds.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Fergus.
Hi there, good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, perfect.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, grand. Well, I suppose always been a point of interest for sustainability, all the way through to university, and then always being involved in voluntary work as well. And I suppose the high point of my voluntary work a long, long time ago was working for the Forest Service out in America, in Minnesota, and just had a great love for the natural world, sustainability from there. And I guess what was great returning home was finding a way that I could therefore make that part of my job, my career, and developing on from there, really. And over the years, had quite a strong background in environmental management and monitoring, and then into the construction industry. And really the latter part, the last 5 years, been moving more into networking and trying to find out how we can sort of get people to share, organizations to share best practice and learning as well. And that's kind of brought me onto my role now with Fit for the Future, who I've been working with now for 3 years. And Fit for the Future has been around since 2013. And represents approximately 120 charity organisations, which in turn has about sort of 600 individuals from those organisations that actually kind of work and take part in our network. Essentially, the network is an environmental sustainability network, and it helps sharing of best practice, lessons learned, and experience as well. Very, very diverse membership. We have RSPB, Woodland Trust, English Heritage, Historic England, British Heart Foundation, Oxfam, also Wildfowl, Wetlands Trust as well, with Lucy as well. So very, very diverse in those areas. And through that, we help all our members to share and network through events, link-ups as well, and the sharing of resources in a wide range of areas, from energy management to transport to waste. And not surprisingly, over the last couple of years, and very much, I think the last 6 months, a real strong focus on net zero. And probably not surprisingly, in our recent members survey of the top 5 challenges, net zero is one of the top ones, trying to people wanting to understand what net zero is, how they can apply that to their organisation and make a success of it.
Thank you, Fergus. And I know we'll talk a bit more about some of the resources and questions, and no doubt that it would be good to understand how Fit for the Future can help a number of participants. Now we've heard from Chris about some of the reflection about key reasons for why net zero matters, and you touched a bit on that, Fergus. But could you share with us your own reflection around why it should matter, and why now also? Because I think there is that element of today, post pandemic, things have changed. Organizations are rethinking about their operating model and what does it mean to come or not come to the office, etc. So I think there are a lot of questions that people are grasping with, as well as wanting to be more efficient. But what are your reflections about how people could think about the reason for net zero?
There are many, and they're very broad and wide as well. I suppose we talk about regulation in Kristofer's presentation about regulation becoming increasingly important. So that's obviously one thing to bear in mind, and reputation as well, I suppose. But I think beyond all this, really, it's an opportunity. I think that's very, very key. I think we must have to look at net zero. It's a huge challenge, but I think there's great opportunity there. It really enables a huge opportunity for organisations to really understand their impact, to have an understanding and control over all aspects of their business, really. And I think that it's an opportunity to make sustainability a part of every single aspect of an organisation as well. I think maybe in the past, perhaps sustainability sometimes can be ring-fenced, but now really with net zero, it can bring it right to the fore. It can be a tangible part of every single part of every operation, from energy through waste, through everything really, and helping people understand what their impact is. And therefore it's an opportunity to become more progressive, more sustainable, not just in an environmental way, but more in a financial way as well. So I think that's a key challenge, is that it doesn't just have to be about regulation and doing what we think is the right thing. It really can be a progressive thing, and really can enhance you and create opportunity in all areas of your organisation. Thank you.
And you're right, many are looking at it more from a full sustainability perspective, not just the environment, which is a bit the focus of today, but that fits into a broader perspective. Lucy, can you share with us your thought on the question?
Yeah, of course, thank you. I think Chris's slide did sum it up really well in terms of the compliance and the reputation which you've talked about. I think, pre-pandemic, I sort of felt that, nearly every single day, the front covers of the papers were talking about climate change through Greta, through Extinction Rebellion, David Attenborough. Then we had the pandemic, obviously, which threw everything out of kilter, but there's perfect opportunity to build back better. And I think all of our supporters, and particularly for the charity section, they're often, while we're not competing, there's only a limited amount of money available for people to donate to charity, and they've got, I want to be members of this organisation or that membership organisation if it's a charity. And I think it matters to our supporters, not just those of us who are members of conservation or environmental organisation. It really matters to our supporters. It matters increasingly to the public. It matters for people's purses and finances. So I think there's that side of things. For us and for me, reputation is important. Complaints, David Attenborough's Blue Planet, I was getting maybe one complaint a month about plastic in shops and restaurants, and then it went up to over 100, and it was really good. I welcome that opportunity because it was the leverage that I needed, because it's what our members, supporters and visitors wanted. So I think there's a whole reputation thing there. It's important. I don't think the compliance thing is going to go away, not that I would want it to. It drives things up, it makes us think about it, it puts it on management boards and directors agendas more firmly if they have to do something rather than they could or should. So actually the compliance side of things is important, but it may not affect every organisation at present. I think there's a lot of opportunities that Fergus mentioned as well, particularly if you're a smaller organisation that may not currently come under any of the legislative drivers. There's actually quite a lot of opportunities and free resource out there through business links and other organisations to support you on the journey to help save money, reduce resources, retain staff and volunteers. Retention of staff and volunteers, it's an important thing, in particular younger people who are starting out in their careers. They expect their employees to be walking the walk and talking the talk. And I think your presentation, Aleron, was really useful in talking about having an environmental or sustainability strategy, but I also think it's important and any organization's corporate strategy or charitable strategy references sustainability, which you also talked about, kind of embedding sustainability into what you do and making it real for your organization. So for us, when we talk about the benefits of sustainability and saving money off our electricity bills, we link it back to some of the breeding birds that we might try and bring back from extinction. Conscious at the beginning of this presentation, I never mentioned what WWT did. I totally missed that one. But we're a wetland conservation charity, but making the benefits of sustainability or environmental sustainability relevant to your product. By doing this, we have managed to save this amount of money that has enabled us to do this, and this is going to be relevant to your own particular charitable aims and outcomes. I think that's really important. Nobody would want to give, or few people would want to give money to a charity that was wasting resources, and the sustainability lens helps you demonstrate that you're looking at efficiency in all areas.
Thank you, Lucy. And I think, yeah, we looked at the pressure from stakeholders, whether they are donors, and I think Chris shared with us some information about that, whether it is employees versus it is or other partners, etc. And the importance of the strategy and the integration into the corporate strategy. Now, in practice, you gave the example of the plastic. I know some organizations doing marathons, they look at how do you prevent all these water bottle in plastic, others who travels a lot, we reduce travel. But could you share with us your thoughts about, or just example about what does it mean in practice to do it? What could people think of and works? Maybe Fergus, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I suppose in practice, rather than perhaps very, very specific examples, I think what we find with our membership really is obviously they want to make very real action, a very practical and impactful activity. And I think really, what does it mean in practice, therefore, is this first of all, to take a step back and understand where you're at, I think, as ever, to understand your starting point, to understand what your impact is, what are your emissions, what are the scope, the depth of your emissions as well. And therefore, without that, you can't perhaps start to make a good, accurate and practical sort of strategy. So I think sustainability is first of all, understanding where you're starting from. And I think a lot of our member organizations are really making massive strides in that. In the past, perhaps it's been quite easy to understand scope 1, so maybe your energy in that area, but now moving forward to scope 3, people are trying to understand about procurement, about transport, and especially with organizations where perhaps you've got members and you've got visitors, what actually belongs to you. So I think a real good starting point for sustainability is really to understand what your impact is. If possible, can you accurately sort of calculate that? That's not always, sort of practical, but to do that as best as possible. And then really it's there from that, then you can start to make a much more sort of coherent and really impactful strategy for action as well. And that can be about the actions you take, where you're going to take them, resources you have, and the timescales you put along that as well. I think also as well, what means in practice really is monitoring. I think the real challenge of many sustainability organizations and activity is data. I think really if you can start to get an understanding of your data, to understand where you're at, what you're doing, and what your progress is, and how that can be read. So I think monitoring and reporting is very key for that as well. And that really therefore allows you to sort of see where you are, where you're going, and where you're at, and then how you can make improvements as well. And I think that is very key in the process as well. I think also as well, if possible there, once you get those areas, therefore, can you make positive impacts as well? Can there be areas where you're not just perhaps reducing your impacts, but also can there be positive impacts as well? And I think that's an important area to start to get to. And therefore, maybe can you actually be positive beyond your actual boundaries and scopes as well? But I think now really environmental sustainability very much, as I mentioned previously, is making it a part of every part of what you do, understanding that every activity you do has an impact, and therefore, can you therefore make your reduction and your net zero planning really to make sure you incorporate everything as well, every single aspect of your business through all the other outputs you have. For example, recently we've been working with quite a few members from the charity retail organization. So their main focus isn't on the environment. However, they do have an environmental impact through activity. So it's really trying to help them to understand what they can do in all aspects, but at the same time, not reducing the key aspects and the key outputs that their organization requires, be it that to raise money in the charity sector. So that's kind of, I think, really what it means in practice. Really, it's a good starting point to encompass everything and to do it in a nice logical fashion. But at the same time, I think it's important is not to be held back too much, to make sure you can get going, and for not really for perfect to be the enemy of the good.
Thank you, Fergus. Lucy.
I would echo a lot of what Fergus has said, and sort of probably as a practitioner rather than overseeing. I think you mentioned a little bit in your presentation, Chris, about environmental management systems. I think looking through at sustainability as a systematic approach, whether you go down any kind of formal or informal environmental management system, is useful to sort of take a step back almost when you're starting out and to look at all of your impact areas, positive, which Fergus just mentioned, because you can be doing some really good things through your products or your services you provide, but looking at all of your impact areas and then assessing them in terms of risk, like you might do a health and safety risk assessment, to understand which are the really the big ones, rather than sometimes the nice to do's are important as well, because they give a sense of achievement to the organization or the stakeholders, whoever they be, but looking at your main impact areas, positive and negative, and then addressing them one by one, recognizing they may change with legislation or changing interests, or plastic, single use is the problem, not necessarily single use plastic, but that's sometimes a hard message to get across when you've got people who are quite rightly concerned about plastic, single use or otherwise. So I think looking at it in practice through a lens, legal compliance, not exciting, not sexy, not going to win you any awards, but equally really important in terms of reputation, and the basics to get right as part of an environmental management system, and often ties in with broader impact areas. I liked Fergus's comment about not letting perfection be the enemy of the good. I've forgotten the exact term. I always think when I get asked to do things and assessments, it's not necessarily the best environmental option, it's the least bad environmental option, because it's really difficult to talk about best practice in sustainability because things change. They're not easy calculations with life cycle assessments and broader stuff. I get asked questions on a daily basis, which is better, this or this? And each question is probably a whole degree's worth of research to come up with an answer that will say it depends. So I think with sustainability, it's starting getting on with it, being flexible, and celebrating success. I think whatever the success may look like, small wins and big wins, because everybody's got different interests and passions. So I think recognizing that on your path to continuous improvement, and as soon as you've done one thing, that's no time to rest on your laurels. That's the time to then look at the next thing. So that's probably what it means to me.
Thank you, Lucy. And we'll come back to successes, etc. But Chris, I was wondering, so we talked about the baselining, the starting point, and how it's important. Could you share with us a few sort of practical steps about how do you start? How do you think about your baseline? And as Lucy mentioned, target really that matters to start with.
Well, I think to Lucy's point now, and to Fergus's, about how you get started in an environmental management system being really important. Both Fergus and Lucy talked about understanding where you're at and where your impact is at. I think it's really crucial up front. Related to that is to decide what we call operational boundaries. What are we going to be counting and what are we not going to be counting, and being really clear up front to not just maybe do the easy things, the minimum compliance of what electricity do we use, but thinking creatively about how are we having positive and negative impact on the environment and emissions through the building construction that we do, which is capital intensive and will have a lot of inherited carbon, through to how you manage a possible retail network and what products you source to sell there to generate income. To really understand, so where is the potential biggest impact? I mean, in the private sector, a materiality assessment is often used to help prioritize those. So talking to your key stakeholders internally and externally to really prioritize the areas of biggest impact and most importance to the organization. And from that, following through and thinking logically through either an environmental management system or a strategy to direct action. And Lucy made the crucial point that the best thing is that it's integrated into the organizational strategy. If sustainability is seen as core to the way that the organization is run. But it can also be done by having a dedicated strategy, sustainability strategy that enables the organizational delivery, but also focuses on how to do that in a way that is in line with global agreed national targets on carbon emission reduction.
Thank you, Chris. And I think we'll share also a bit later on, if people want to see example of what is the materiality assessment of some of the resources, I'm sure we can share some links, or I'm sure you can share things with us.
I was about to say, we have a diagnostic on the website that will help organizations understand a bit about where they're at, and there's resources as a first point of call that you can go to on that Aleron website.
Perfect, thank you. Now back to you, Lucy and Fergus. Can you share with us some of the greatest successes that you had from a sustainability perspective that you felt very proud of? And that could be your own example of things that you've heard also, but things that you really felt were great achievements. I don't know who wants to start first.
I'm always quite inspired by Blenheim Palace's example. They're obviously a single site, so it's slightly different to WWT, my organisation, which has got 10 sites throughout the UK and an international programme. So some of our work to try and reduce our international travel is a challenge, because we do have an international programme. We work with partners and others, but Blenheim Palace has done a lot of work on a lot of areas, but particularly around their visitor travel. They're obviously an stately home in Oxfordshire. And I think they've increased their visitor travel other than by car by about 500% by incentivising and improving the links with the transport network. I appreciate for those charities that aren't visitor attractions or in the middle of nowhere, that may not be that relevant. But for me, an organisation with over 1 million visitors a year, many of whom travel by car because of the location of our sites or because of the nature of our visitors, birders with scopes or families with children, sometimes using public transport isn't great. So I find that a really positive, 500% increase, and I think 4 or 5 years is staggering and really encouraging. There's lots of others. I think any organisation that's managed to achieve positive things on the sustainability agenda over the last few years, given the current challenges, needs to be commended. But that was one thing that jumped out at me, but I don't know if you've got any others, Fergus.
Yeah, I mean, as a very, very broadly, it's, I suppose, one success, I think, of the last 6 months was the enormous challenges throughout society. But our members coming to us, and I think everyone is more engaged, committed to sustainability than ever before. And net zero is a great example for that. It's early on for many people, but people want to understand what it is, how they can get involved, and how they can make it a part of what they do. But also within that as well, great success is people really want to share and to collaborate as well. And that's been really, really sort of telling. I think people see the key word is partnership now, as Lucy mentioned earlier, that people really are keen to sort of make sure they can work together, and it's not competitive in that sense. Really, there is a greater collaboration. That's always been there, but I kind of think that's becoming stronger and stronger throughout, really. I suppose a specific example of success, and there's many within the network in a wide range of areas. I think the Guide Dogs for the Blind is a great example of trying to really incorporate sustainability throughout their whole organisation, and I suppose getting buy-in as well. And I suppose that's a key aspect, to get buy-in from senior management all the way through to every single person who's involved in the organisation. And a great example of Guide Dogs for the Blind is creating their Green Champions, where they essentially allow the staff to sort of understand what sustainability strategy is, and also to contribute to it as well in its development, but also in its implementation. And this wasn't specifically about net zero. This was kind of prior to when net zero was perhaps being focused on. So quite a few years ago, they were really looking at making sure all their staff were aware of what could be done. So with energy efficiency and waste, recycling, all those aspects, and through all their different areas, and through the National Training Centre, they made a lot of sort of initiatives with behaviour change, so fairly low cost sort of initiatives of getting people to reduce energy and to reduce waste as well. And I think in their very first year in their National Training Centre, they reduced their costs by £30,000, which is a significant reduction. So straight away, it was involving staff, it was increasing the sustainable message as well, and it was making a direct sort of saving as well to the overhead as well. And they're fantastic, the Guide Dogs, and actually sort of saying what that means. Therefore, if we're saving X amount of money, that could mean one guide dog is trained. And I think that's great. It really therefore takes, when you start talking about sort of tons of carbon saved or sort of thousands of pounds saved, you actually talk about what it means to your organisation that has a real meaning. So I think they've been a great success story in not only sort of making sort of some great sort of progress, but also really raising the awareness of that. And therefore it comes out, and that success breeds success as well. And the key part of this is Guide Dogs are fantastic members of the network, and they're really keen to share this, and we've done events with them, and I think that can get the ethos again. There's great success there, but it doesn't need to be ring fenced. Lessons can be learned. I think that success can be replicated by many other organisations, whether you're in that particular sector or beyond it.
Thank you very much, Fergus. That was and both of you. That was really useful and inspiring. I think what we do now is maybe to move to the Q&A session. I'm just taking the time. We have a number of questions actually coming through. I think that the first one is from someone who set up a climate change group at Charity, and the person was wondering if we had any tip on how to communicate the urgency of the climate emergency alongside the benefits of becoming more green without scaring people internally and putting people off engaging with it. Who would like to answer? Lucy.
I think it's trying to frame it in terms of benefits to individuals and organizations, be it and making things seem manageable. You know, that sometimes the steps that need to be taken by individuals aren't always huge. Car sharing 1 day a week, 20% saving on, assuming you're going into the office, of course. You know, trying to reduce food waste, but actually that can be an opportunity to create more interesting recipes with food. Trying to frame it in positive terms, because if we don't do that, it does seem too big for all of us. Eco-anxiety is a very, very real, very prevalent issue, particularly for younger people now. So I think it's probably trying to frame things in positives and results, maybe focusing on a few key areas rather than the fact that it's every aspect of everyone's lifestyle that needs to be looked at. There's quite a useful tool I always find, Project Drawdown, if anyone's looked at that, which is globally looking at the biggest areas of opportunity to reduce climate change impacts, and depending on how you rank them, you know, things around refrigeration are often quite a big one, but we can all personally and as businesses look at our use of refrigerators, making sure they're not leaking, making sure they're defrosted. Those are sort of manageable things that you can put a figure on, but again, it's probably, sorry, I only looked at the question briefly, so I might have gone way off topic here, apologies. But I think, you know, it's a principle of keeping it simple and, you know, making people, perhaps, you know, if it's appropriate in the organization involved, you know, making it something where you can celebrate that success by this individual's come up with this great idea. If we did it across the organization, these would be the benefits. Here's a prize, everyone likes a bit of chocolate or whatever it may be. Those are some of my things, but I think it has to be manageable. And I think, yeah, we need to not try and frame it in too much doom and gloom, because we all know it's a crisis, but equally in order to engage, we need to be able to feel like we are achieving something. So measuring it, which Fergus has talked about a number of times, you know, being able to measure it and able to manage it, to also be able to see those successes. By this simple act of changing the lighting, we've reduced our costs and our emissions by X%. That makes it real, and people then understand why they've had the pain of changing all the lights or whatever it may be.
Thank you, Lucy. Fergus, do you have anything to add?
Go on, Fergus.
Sorry, I would say I totally agree with Lucy about sort of you know, trying to make sure, I suppose, not to be overwhelmed. It can be very overwhelming what's happening in the broader world. And sometimes when you come in and think, okay, what are we going to do in our organisation? Where on earth do I start? And I've spoken about understanding your baseline, and people start talking about the scopes and then EMS, and suddenly it becomes very overwhelming. And where on earth do you start? So I think it's really important to sort of to talk to other people as well. Because I think there's been many times when I've been in meetings and events, and everybody thinks that they know the least in that particular room, and that's never the case really. And sometimes people think, well, I can't ask that question because surely everybody else is farther down the road than me and knows the answer and knows what to do. And that's never the case. So never to be overwhelmed, and never to be sort of worried about asking what you think might be a stupid question, because it never is. And many people will be in the same situation as you now, or were in the same situation. So I think it's always to sort of to be open in dialogue, and I think with the area of networking really does help in that area.
Thank you very much. Chris, did you want to add anything else?
Yeah, I think both Fergus and Lucy are bringing up some really good points. I think the positivity message is really vital. I think it's communicating not just the actions. For example, we need to recycle, or the lights, but the vision of it and what we're trying to achieve. And I think to an earlier point I was making, trying to relate it to the social mission of the organization and tying it into a narrative about why this is important. It is a key driver of social inequality, and there will often, if not always, be a direct or indirect link between the problem you're solving. You know, if your children's charity fighting climate change will help their future. If you're in social housing, you know, similar issues, you're creating safer homes, and hopefully less flooding, etc. So there's many ways to do that. Celebrating success, as Lucy said earlier, communicating the results and really being clear about that. I mean, there is good news. You know, that the fact that there is regulation out there is a consequence of government and society taking it very seriously. And you know, in mainland Europe and the EU, they are now bringing through massive legislation targeting large private sector organizations that will eventually start trickling down. The UK is talking about the same thing, which will commit all large organizations and businesses to report how they're going to achieve a 1.5 degree world. And those are great pieces of news. And so every organization can be part of that journey.
Thank you. Lucy.
May I just add something? There's some really good organizations out there, which I'm sure many of the attendees are aware of, but something like Hubbub, they communicate in a slightly different way. And sometimes you don't necessarily, you know, it's all this nudge theory. I'm no expert on sort of psychological theory, but actually, you know, you often, it's so engaging and so positive, and sometimes it's not necessarily framed in terms of climate emergency or anything else. It's a positive thing, be it socially or in terms of community benefits. And I think that's, there's lots of examples out there, Hubbub just being one, of ways to frame things slightly differently. I think the example they had years ago, which was around street littering, and they had to put your cigarette butts in a yes/no box according to if you thought littering was good or bad. And in doing it, people who might have littered didn't litter because they put it in a box that was labeled good or bad. And it was just such a clever way of showing views and things. That's just a small example that stuck with me for years. The other side of things is getting different people in your organization. If the original question was about internal communication, different people in your organization to say what it means to them, or how they'd never thought about it until they realized this about their children or grandchildren, be it the directors or be it the cleaners or be it, you know, whatever, the driver or so, but different things to different people, because we are all very different creatures and we have different ways of learning and responding. But by asking different people and levels in the organization, you'll get different answers, which perhaps will engage other parts of the organization.
Thank you, Lucy. I think RAP is another organization with interesting messages in terms of changing consumers' behavior. So it's mostly about consumer behaviors, but actually a lot of it is applicable to all organizations. Maybe another question, which is about resources, because we talked about the starting point, the baselinings, we talked about the reporting. It's fair to say that there is not a sort of framework that is specific to charities. So if you're charity at the moment, you try to do baselining or your reporting, you will have to look around a number of frameworks. So the question, and it may be something actually we decide to work on as a group in terms of creating this tool of benchmarking. But at the moment, which resources can organization look at? Where would you guide them in terms of finding benchmarks, finding tools that can enable them through their journey, whether they are at the very beginning or actually progressing toward the reporting of their achievements? Lucy, do you want to start?
Well, this isn't a plug, but no, I do find the Fit for the Future network really valuable, because I'm looking at other landowning charities and what they've done in that area. So that is a really useful resource for me. I will let Fergus talk about that in more detail shortly. But Project Drawdown, I just mentioned, just in terms of higher level global stuff, that's always a useful resource. Because WWT is actually quite a small organization, we've got less than 500 employees, we've got about 400 employees. We actually come under for some reporting routes and frameworks, we're actually an SME. So for some of the new net zero pledges, of which there are lots and lots, and net zero in itself is highly complicated, and it depends on your boundaries and where you're defining it and what you're defining and your targets and your baselines. But there are pledge routes for SMEs, which are less than 500, that some really good useful resources there. The Race to Zero playbook is a very useful, I think, sort of resource specific to net zero. Net regs, which covers, it's the regulators guidance for environmental law, but it only now covers Northern Ireland, Wales and Scotland, not England, but much of the legislation in there is relevant. But that's a useful resource if you're looking at something technical. There's this RAP, as you mentioned, Nicholas, is very good. There is a lack of, I used to work in the NHS, and most NHS trusts would go and do things in isolation. And I think any route that enables you to share things with others, your peers, through Aleron, this route fits for the future. Networking, professional membership bodies, if you have people in your organization who are chartered in health and safety, they also have environmental opportunities. Maybe you're in a sustainability membership, IEMA, or other organizations, I'm not meaning to plug them, but they have resources and networks out there that might be able to support.
Thank you, Lucy. Fergus, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. I mean, many of the ones that have been mentioned already by Lucy, a few others that we kind of work with. An important part of what we do in the network is to make sure we have a lot of our members, but we try to make sure that we talk to other networks and associations as well. I think another great one is, once again, focus on heritage. I know there's sort of organisations out there with a heritage sort of focus on. The National Lottery Heritage Fund is a great source, not just of grant funding, but a great source of sustainability advisors now. And we're working with a partnership with them as well. And also the Institute of Conservation is a great resource of sort of support and sustainability out there. I appreciate, once again, that's kind of in towards the heritage area as well, but obviously still hopefully relevant for many attenders today. Lucy mentioned IEMA. IEMA are partners of us as well. That's a great resource as well. So that's a great one for many areas of sustainability as well. Always being updated, so very good in that. Also, the Charity Retail Association. I think that'd be very pertinent to people today as well. The Charity Retail Association recently had their very first sort of green sort of conference, which we were lucky to talk at as well. So they're an area that's really trying to pick up now and trying to support many sort of charities in that particular area, in the area of sort of sustainability as well. And of course ourselves. So I mean, this is what we do really. We are there to sort of to share information. And I mentioned previously, over the last 18 months, particularly, we have not been able to do our events on the ground. So all our events have been virtual. So we now record all of our events happening on our members area. So with that, we have sort of presentations recorded and are there to share, and resources as well. So sometimes it can be, we can help to sort of to share things quite broadly, but as Lucy mentioned, sometimes it's those one-to-ones as well, really. So, you know, we'd delighted people want to come to us and we can link people up, and we've been quite curiously described as an environmental dating agency in the past. And I suppose, what does that mean? It just means people might come to us and say, we're now doing a waste initiative or a transport initiative or a biodiversity. Can we meet someone who has the same interest, who's got experience greater than us? So we can do that as well. So I think all these areas are great. There's no definitive one. I think as things are moving on, I think all the networks and the different associations are now starting to talk to each other. So I think now there's a lot more sharing, not just within organisations, but also with sort of networking as well. And I think that makes it a lot easier. So we will be delighted people to come to us and we can help them, but also we're always happy to sort of pass them on to our other partners as well, wherever we can. Perfect.
Thank you. We just one last question, then we'll close. Question about carbon offsetting and the fact that you know, of course, many corporates are buying carbon credits or other ways, planting trees, etc. But if you're a charity and you want to use your funds for other things, and you know, what do you do with the offsets? You know, have you seen organizations doing something creative or other solutions and buying credits?
Yeah. I can try and answer this one. I mean, we're going down our net zero route at the moment. We are lucky, in inverted commas, enough to have a lot of land, and where we make changes to the land that we manage, we will be looking to rebalance the emissions we can't reduce. So we've got a reductions pathway, which the question is asked about. So once we've reduced as much as we can through electrification and efficiency, we will have a residual amount. We are a charity. We would not want to give our limited charity resources, nor would we necessarily legally be allowed to give them to another charity to plant a tree or do something else. So we're looking at internally repackaging that. There may be a route to do it through your supply chains, depending on what your charity does, something called insetting. The most common example might be a coffee company that works with its suppliers to plant trees for shade that also absorb carbon and increase habitat and increase the productivity of the coffee growth. But depending on your charity, that may not be an option. I know that the Environment Agency, the main environmental regulator in England, are currently looking at this, whether or not it's legal for them to pay into an offset scheme, and even if it is legal, whether it's morally appropriate, given that it's public money that they're doing that with. I think this area is going to be something that is going to develop in the near future. Net zero is still relatively new. The rate of progress in terms of, obviously the crisis, but also the discussion on it, the pledges, is exponential, but a lot of the solutions are not yet, in my opinion, married up for all types of organizations, including charities and those who don't own land, who couldn't change their land management practices. But perhaps you can look at green roofs if you've got them. And maybe there's a way in future with the greenhouse gas protocol land guidance that's coming, which is looking at land use. There may be opportunities there, but I'm really sorry not to have detailed answers, but I think we're going to have to get creative, and perhaps somebody else here has got some really good answers, including those in the attendees.
Thank you. I think we'll just in interest of time, we'll stop there. And I want to thank, of course, our panel participants, and thank you all. I think it was great to hear about really how to think about net zero from your starting point to the strategy, and we've heard a lot of practical examples. Maybe one last thing from Lucy and Fergus. If you had a piece of advice of anyone on their journey, very, very, very quickly, what would it be, just as a sentence? And then we'll close there. I think
I'm biased, but I'll say to network, to share and to collaborate. I think everyone's becoming much more open now, and I think there's never a stupid question. To always ask questions, and to ask other people, other organisations having the same challenge as you, and will in the future, really. So I think, network, share, collaborate. Thank you. Fergus, your microphone is now working at the end of the session, which let's see. Oh.
Yeah, it would probably be to recognize what you're already doing, because you'll probably find you're already doing things in this area through your recycling on site too. So don't, start with what you're doing and then build on that, and get on with it, because everything you do matters, and you'll probably be surprised just how many of your staff and volunteers and supporters will engage and help you with on that journey.
Perfect. Chris, one last word and then we close.
Yeah, don't try to solve it by yourself. Reach out to others. And contact any of us, I think, on the panel, I would say, if you have any questions following the session.
Great. Well, thank you very much all, and have a great rest of the day. And please don't hesitate to reach out if you want to have access to more information, more material, or network. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thanks all.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.